have to conform to our undergrad standards.
There is no comma.
It's Turlock.
You do the way things
Slow your roll, yeah. Okay, so public participation in a special meeting is typically only for the item on the agenda. However, I have Jason Freitas. Where's Jason? Is he here?
You thought you had Jason Freitas.
He's probably outside. I saw him here, Mayor.
All right. He can always do the next one. Is he coming? Thank you. All right. 2 seconds. And he's not here,
I keep telling you to get the jokes ready.
right?
There's pauses, there's awkward pauses all the time. You need to be ready.
So anybody else have a public participation card that they wanted to cover in this first special meeting? All right, seeing none, we're just going to go ahead and close the public participation, move on to declaration of conflicts of interest, disqualifications. Seeing and hearing none, we're going to move on to scheduled matters. We will, if this carries over, if Mr. Bray talks slow and we have questions, we'll move to conclude this after our other meeting. We'll get the rest of it included in that. So, Mr. Bray.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This probably will continue over. I will do my best to speed it up, but it is quite a complex process. There's a lot to understand here. So, with that being said, the reason we're here tonight are to address our streets and roads, the conditions, the maintenance of our streets and roads, and the funding component of our streets and roads. The main actions tonight are to adopt a revised SB1 list for fiscal year 18-19, so this current fiscal year, and also amend Fund 219 SB1 to reflect the revised list, adopt the SB1 list for next year, 2019-20, fiscal year 19-20, and also approve a road rehabilitation strategy. So those are all related, and as we get into it, you'll see how they work together. Here's our road system based on the general plan build-out. So this identifies all of the roads that are identified in the general plan when all of the subdivisions and all the areas are fully built out. There are some sections of roads here that are not currently in existence now, but it's one of the better depictions of our overall road network system and how it relates with different road classifications. So the city maintains roughly 507 lane miles. We also maintain roughly 1.85 square miles of roadway. So if you think roughly 2 miles long by 1 mile wide, all enclosed, a large road, a 1 mile wide road for 2 miles long. That's how much road system we have out there. Of the 507 miles, there are 1,808 unique segments within our system. So those segments are broken up based on the different types of classification, the different block or segment lengths, and then it's also broken up based on relative PCI conditions. So if you think of a block of road, maybe the first half of the block is really good pavement, the other half of the block is bad. Those would be correspond to 2 separate road segments. And it's done that way so that our pavement management system, Street Saver, which we'll get into later, can accurately reflect the necessary and required treatments and the relative cost for those. Our road system is comprised of arterial, collector, and local streets. These are all different classifications. Arterial streets are your larger streets. They're your Monte Vistas, Folkerth, West Main, and Lander. Your collector streets are going to be the streets that predominantly tie into the arterial streets and collect a larger amount of traffic than, say, your local streets. Those are your Berkeley's, Quincy's, Johnson's, Tuolumne, and lastly, we have our local streets. So that's all the other streets that are not designed to carry a large amount of traffic. It's more local in nature. With a road network this large, it's important to have a road rehabilitation strategy. There are two main funding sources for road maintenance. The first is assessment districts, and the second is roadway improvement funds. Assessment districts are not discretionary, so we won't really talk about them as they don't really apply to the road maintenance strategy, but they are funds that the citizens and the city spends to maintain the road, so I want to make sure I mention it. The three main components of maintaining a road network are maintenance, safety, and projects. We'll go a little bit further into what each of these categories mean. The maintenance category has street maintenance, such as pothole repair, striping and pavement markings, traffic signs, street landscape maintenance. So when you think of street landscape maintenance, this is mainly the median islands. They have trees and bushes and such. There's also the lights, signals, and signs component of the maintenance category. So these are funds that are dedicated for paying the power costs for the traffic signals and the street lights that are not in assessment districts. They are your maintenance and operation costs for all of your traffic signals as well, all your necessary supplies and ancillary parts. The next component is the safety component. So when you look at your road network system, safety plays a large part of it. All of the things that we do between maintenance component or a larger project, they all have a strategy component or a safety component or safety element tied to them. And so this is kind of intermixed in all the different activities that are performed. But as this road maintenance strategy is laid out, the safety component is there to really address expenses and smaller projects. They're smaller in size and scope than your larger traditional road construction projects. They're set up in a way that they're fluid and dynamic to address issues as they arise, as opposed to identifying that there's a need for improved safety at a certain location, going back to the drawing board, taking many months to come out and address. It's supposed to be fluid and dynamic. This can all be attributed to increased striping or revise some striping, signage, lighting, maybe some signal modifications. So the idea is anything within the road network system that could improve safety would be identified in this category.
Just that alone, how much do we usually spend a year, roughly?
We don't have an identified component. It's all tied up into the various things that we do. And so the road maintenance strategy that's proposed to you tonight actually identifies the three different components. So in future years, we'll be able to track, okay, how much do we spend on that specific component? Without having that component, I mean, every crosswalk that we upgrade has a safety element to it. All the signals, and when we replace streetlights with LEDs, those all contribute to the safety of the road network system, but it's hard to materialize exactly what that is right now.
Could I ask a quick question, follow-up question?
Yeah, definitely.
On the proposal, I think we have, is it $100,000 for safety? So would that be more on, like the fluid scenario projects where we identify something that comes up, it's a safety risk, we've got to immediately act on that, as opposed to stuff that's built into some of our existing projects? It
is. That's the intent. The intent is to, whether through our normal day-to-day operations, maybe our maintenance staff is out there fixing potholes, doing some striping, and they notice something that could be improved, should be improved, or it's brought forward from one of our citizens and constituents that, hey, there's a safety issue here. That if we have a safety component identified, it's easier to make a timely improvement to those areas, as opposed to tying it to a larger project, which can sometimes take many months. And I didn't say this up front, by all means, if you have questions, Please interrupt me and stop me. This is long. I'm gonna make it as fast as possible. But then I'll check in every once in a while too. And then last is the project category. This is the most visible. And when people think about road maintenance, this is probably what they think about. These are larger capital projects that take months to years from conception to completion. The road rehabilitation treatments are a variety of treatments that range from slurry seals and microsurfacing to your preventative maintenance type treatment to a heavy maintenance, which is an overlay like what we had just done on Monte Vista, to a reconstruct, which is the pavement surface has failed. We can't rehabilitate it any further. We need to start from scratch, which is what currently is happening on West Main right now. How are roadway conditions measured? Roadway conditions are measured on what's known as a PCI, or a pavement condition index. The pavement condition index is a numerical value from 0 to 100, with 0 being a completely failed road. And if you think of like an aggregate base gravel road off in the county or the mountains, and 100 representing a freshly paved road with no blemishes. Turlock is currently at a 57 right now. This is an average of cities our size. It is on the low average. Most cities, well, I shouldn't say that. The average for Central Valley towns our size is 64. So we are slightly below average. Back in 2013, when we first adopted the use of Street Saver, we adopted the pavement condition index report, Turlock was at a 67. So in 6 years, we have declined from a 67 to a 57. That is directly attributable to the amount of funding that we are expending on our roads right now. To help correlate what the different PCI numbers mean in terms of what the roads look like, here are 5 different roads with corresponding PCI. So a PCI of anything over 90 is a fairly newly paved road. PCI 79 is a road that's in good shape and that is maintainable through the use of, say, slurry seals or micro surfaces, but maybe it has a couple cracks. Maybe the pavement is aged and starting to show the rocks. PCI 61, which is probably pretty familiar around town here. That's a road that is it's in need of heavy maintenance. So a road in this category, depending on the classification, would need an overlay or an asphalt rubber cape seal, which is a different type of treatment, but it's not to the point where it needs to be fully reconstructed. And then a PCI of 40 is just a further deterioration of that. There's a lot more cracking in PCI 40 road than 61, and that's how it relates to the structure of the road, not just the surface of the road. And then a PCI road of less than 20 is typically a road that's just completely failed and has no more serviceable life. Of the roads in Turlock, so we said Turlock has an average PCI of 57. 47% of the roads in Turlock are at a very good percentage, which is anywhere from 100 to 70. The good range is from 50 to 69, represents 17% of our roads. Poor and very poor, and I'll get to why those are the same color, but they represent 18% respectively. Here is a map of our current PCI conditions in the city of Turlock. It's hard to see everything just because the map is so large. But what you see is the green roads are, for the most part, in the areas that are shaded blue. The areas that are shaded blue are assessment districts. There are other green roads throughout town, and those are more indicative or reflective of the road rehabilitations projects that the city has undertaken in the past couple of years.
Okay, hold on real quick.
Yes.
Because I can't see this very well. I don't know if anybody else can. So green, that's going north or east and west.
That would be canal.
Okay. So that's a green road. That means that it's in what PSI?
It would be, it's in a PCI of.
Or PCI.
100 to
Sorry.
70. That's okay.
Of what?
100 to 70.
100 to 70. Okay.
So the green roads are roads that we can perform routine preventative maintenance on that reduces the amount of funding that it takes to maintain the quality of that pavement.
Okay, so the rest of them are all the residentials. In the red is the residentials that don't have assessment districts.
A lot of them are, yes.
Okay.
There are some roads that are red that are not residentials. There are also arterials and collectors. So it's not limited to residential roads, but a lot of them are residential roads.
And then that one line going down is Golden State,
It is, yes.
because that's really bad too.
There's a couple sections of green in there, and those correspond to the traffic signal projects where we had to put in some pavement with those projects.
Point of clarification. So you say at the very good is when we could just do some maintenance, and then does that shift from 70 to 69 at that point? Does it now require more investment?
So typically when you make the jump from 70 to 69, Street Saver will recommend a different treatment. And we'll see the pavement deterioration curve in a little bit, and it's based upon that curve. But, the Street Saver program it's a decision-making tool. It's a recommendation tool. It would recommend that this type of treatment be applied. Staff would then go out and just verify that, make sure that everything is looking right. And just because it says one thing, if in the best interest of what the current conditions are, we could do something different.
So because of the rains that we had, it's like an every 10-year event. Did your program say that they deteriorated faster within this cycle?
So the pavement deterioration curve is based on a standardized and normalized curve for different types of roads. And the system utilizes that pavement deterioration curve, and so every year that goes on, it attributes a deduction in PCI based on that curve. The only way to go out and accurately reflect the true conditions would be to go perform an analysis or a measurement of those, and then input those inspection results into the system. Then you can start, over time with history, you can start generating your own localized pavement deterioration curve. That's something that the city hasn't done. The city hasn't utilized this system really to its full capacity, but we haven't really started utilizing it until 2013, so there's not a lot of historical information there. And I know the map is hard to see, so I do apologize for that. The screen's only so big, though. So to help correlate what streets fall within what category, I wanted to lay out some streets that maybe you're familiar with. And so these are streets that are in the green category, or PCI 70 to 100. This is Canal from Daubenberger to Johnson, Vermont from West Avenue to South Orange, Folkerth from 99 to Golden State, Tuolumne from Quincy to Berkeley, and Colorado from Christopherson to Springer, Walnut, and then also Springer Curl to Panorama. So these are all roads that are in the very good category. A lot of them represent roads that the city had done work on within the past 10 to 15 years, or roads that are in assessment districts. The next category, are streets in the next category, in the yellow category, PCI 50 to 69. So these are probably streets that you're more familiar with. There's Cahill, the section between Colorado and Minaret. There's Johnson between Marshall and Miraflores. Grant, Countryside. Tornell from Colorado to Robin. The section of Gear between Regis and Calaveras. And then also Kroll on the west side of the university from Monte Vista to Christofferson. Oops. There we go. Lastly, the streets with the PCI of poor and very poor, 0 to 49. You're probably also quite familiar with these as well. But all of East Avenue is in this category. Quincy from Marshall to Hawkeye is in this category. Most of all of Linwood is in this category. Canal, the part that wasn't part of the city's rehabilitation project in 2009 is here. Hawkeye from Palmer to Daubenberger, and then also Hedstrom and Taylor. One road that didn't make this list, but I forgot to mention it, is also Wayside. Wayside's in there as well. This is a typical pavement deterioration curve. So Councilmember Nasrati were talking about this a little bit ago. And this is the curve that depicts the relative PCI and the expected drop in that PCI based on the percent life of that pavement. So in the upper left-hand corner, when a road is newly paved, whether it's a new road or it's reconstructed or there's an overlay, the PCI is represented at 100, which is excellent. And it's as that pavement goes on without any maintenance treatments, it will traditionally follow that curve. Maybe it's shifted over to the left or right a little bit, but for the most part, it follows that curve. And so what that says is that there is a fairly flat part of the curve before it starts to steepen towards the bottom of the graph, the bottom right. That flat part of the curve depicts that the pavement condition index decreases a little amount in a large amount of time. So the steepness of the graph is relative to the amount of pavement deterioration as a respect to time. Yes.
Poor and very poor happen quickly.
Poor and very poor happen quickly, yes.
Okay.
It is much more cost effective to maintain roads that are in the good category before they deteriorate. The rate of deterioration happens faster once you're in the lower category, and also your pavement maintenance costs increase exponentially.
Mr. City Manager,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I ask a question?
please.
Nathan, the microsurfacing, so if you had a new pavement and you invested, if you were to say you did microsurfacing every year, what does that, is this curve inexorable and these are just points on it? Or if you make the investment in getting it done right to begin with and then stay on it, what does that do to the useful life of the pavement?
Excellent question. I'll show that graphically on the next slide, but what it does is with each maintenance treatment, it essentially it reestablishes your baseline of near 100. The typical curve the curve would then follow the typical curve, but it extends that pavement life in that good category. The next graph will depict that as well graphically. So the costs shown here, these are 2015 costs. So these are the costs that were realized. Microsurfacing in 2015 costs roughly $4.50 a square yard. These are all the costs rolled up into per square yard. So this is the cost for the actual work to be done, the engineering, the inspection, all the costs total.
And a typical residential roadway is how many square yard?
A typical residential, you're going to make me do math here.
You don't have to be extremely accurate, but give us a ballpark.
900 square yards.
Okay.
Microsurfacing and slurry seal are reserved for roads that are in good conditions, where as you go down the curve, we go into overlays, thick overlays, and reconstruct. So you can see just from this graph in 2015 that the microsurfacing cost was $4.50 a square yard versus the reconstruction cost of $62 per square yard. So a huge, substantial increase based on the level of effort. And if we show that to today's costs, the costs have increased anywhere between 1.5 and 3 times, depending on the treatment. Today, microsurfacing costs roughly $14 a square yard. A inlay, which is a different type of treatment, costs nearly $46 a square yard as opposed to the range of 17 to 32. And a reconstruct is running around the average of $86 a square yard. And so the construction industry is at all-time highs in terms of construction costs. And so when we generate these estimates of how far will our dollars go, it's not as far as it was in 2015 and in previous years. Here is the next slide, Mr. City Manager, that we were talking about. The green line, the green dashed line depicts a maintenance treatment. So that maintenance treatment, that would be a microsurface, that would be a slurry seal, and it would jump the pavement condition up, which is represented by the vertical line, and then it would start to follow that traditional pavement deterioration curve. What also is depicted here is the red line, the red dash line, that's a vertical jump. Those treatments also bring your condition up to nearly 100, but at substantially more cost. And so I'm not a car guy, but I always think of the analogy it's pretty similar. Whereas if you maintain your car and you maintain your oil, and you go in and get your oil checked up routinely, it doesn't cost that much, but it extends the life of your vehicle. If you think, well, I'm not going to go in and get my oil changed, I can't afford that, I'm going to save those monies now. A couple times that happens, your engine blows up, now you're out a whole lot more money as opposed to if you would have just invested that money up front. So it's real similar. Is there any questions on deterioration curves or how pavement lives? I can see you thinking.
Has there ever been any consideration to like when we sign up for a project and we're getting it fixed, brand new, in great condition, to essentially create what would be an assessment district fund for that road and lock in a long-term agreement with an organization to stabilize the costs and say maybe not 7 years, but maybe every 10 years before we reach that, you're going to come in and redo it?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. Any private development, any development of land that occurs, that is how that is handled. So any of the new homes, any of the new businesses that come in, they develop some land, they improve the road in front of their area, they are required as a condition of development to enter into an assessment district. And you brought it up, and I failed to mention it earlier. The typical life cycle of when we would do these seals is every 7 years. So that is that's an opportunity for the city to create a funding cycle for those segments of road. I know it was hard to see in the map, but there was a bunch of different blue areas which represented all the different assessment districts. And so those all represent areas that the city has required developers, owners, to improve their road and create an assessment district for a long-term maintenance strategy. When the city comes through with maintenance projects, it's a little bit more difficult. I don't know if it's something that we've explored in the past, say when we did Canal. I don't think that we went around, knocked on the doors and asked the neighbors, hey, we're going to repair your road. Are you willing to enter into an assessment district? Yeah. That's a good question.
Could we even go as far to say whichever segment can chip in the most, the city would be more likely to match? So if you pull together some businesses, some residents, and find out what their contribution, or like the percent of the community that would contribute?
Yeah, I think that is within council's purview, if that's the way we wanted to structure the projects, and almost pay to play, right? I think that's a viable option. Okay, so historic funding, and I based my figures on 2015. 2015 was a relatively good year in terms of street funding. The different, and I said I wasn't going to talk about it, but here it is again. The assessment districts, those are non-discretionary funds, and so they're not associated with the dollar amounts shown below, but they are monies that were spent. There, in 2015, there was gas tax, which was comprised of a couple different types of funding of gas tax, what's known as the 2103 funds, Prop 1B and Prop 42 funds. Those equated to roughly $1.961 million. There was LTF funding, local transportation funding, which equated to roughly $936,000. And then there was the federal apportionment for road rehabilitation work, which contributed to roughly $715,000. All of those totaled.
Councilmember Ariano?
Right, these are going through Stancock.
No, LTF monies were distributed to the city from Stancog. Federal dollars Stancog has a role in them, but they're not dispersing them to us. Since Stancog is our federal road agency, they maintain and they approve the Federal Transportation Improvement Program, which is how all of the city's federal projects need to be programmed. So that's really kind of a whole different area, but as long as our projects are programmed, and that action is through Stancog, then the funds come directly from the feds to Caltrans to the city.
Another one, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So you're just talking about construction costs going up every single year. Are assessment costs reevaluated? The contribution that people have to make into the assessment districts?
Yeah, so most assessment districts have an escalator in there. It's tied to the ENR, the Engineering News Record Index. And so over the course of time, typically the ENR goes up, but we have seen the ENR go down, so those costs would then be reflective of those also.
And is that properly capturing the difference in costs?
For the streets component, I believe so. I'm 99% sure it is. So the historic funding in 2015, we had roughly $3.6 million of discretionary funds. The current funding, what is projected for fiscal year 1920, gas tax funds, we have SB1 funds, we have federal funds and Measure L funds. All of these funds are, for the most part, discretionary, which means they can be applied to any different road segment for road maintenance purposes. Gas tax, we're estimating to receive $1,855,000, which it's indicative of the steady decline the city and all the cities and counties are seeing from the gas tax funding. So we're down there, but it's $1,855,000. We also have SB1 funds, which is we are in our second year of receiving SB1 funds. Next year, we're estimated to receive $1,321,000. Our federal apportionment next year is estimated to be $929,000. So the federal apportionment routinely increases every 2 years, so it's consistent with that as well. And the other new funding category is Measure L. We're estimated to receive $3,200,000 just in the local roads component of Measure L. Measure L has different components, but I'm really just focusing on the component that deals with street maintenance. What you don't see here is you don't see LTF funding. LTF funding was available back in 2015, and up until about 2 years ago, the city received apportionments from LTF. StanCog voted to no longer disperse the additional LTF monies and instead maintain them for a future transit project. The StanCog Policy Board made that decision, and so the city relied on those funds primarily for the traffic signal maintenance costs and the power costs for the traffic signals and the non-assessment district streetlights.
Do you know when that vote was?
I don't
It
know.
was last year.
I believe it was last spring. Was it September of 2017? 18.
So how do we get those back?
That's a,
I'll address that.
Okay.
so you'll see further on in the presentation, identification of those expenses through SB1 funds.
How much do you think that was?
In 2015, we received roughly $930,000.
So with a 10% increase?
Well, there's a different funding strategy in place. LTF funding is the transit centers take money off the top for their operating expenses, and then the transit agencies take up to their cap. And the amount of money that's left over, it would then be dispersed amongst the different entities. Turlock Transit, the regional transit center, was not created at the time of our last disbursement, so it's hard to say exactly what it would be because they're now taking money off the top as well. But I don't know if Supervisor Chiesa can answer any of those questions when he comes up too. So although we don't have the LTF funding, we're in a much better position than we were back in 2015 to address our road maintenance need. One thing I didn't mention, the total estimated funding available for road maintenance is roughly $7.3 million. The expected funding just, again, kind of further identifies of the 7.3 where the different components are coming from, how they comprise that 7.3 million. We'll take a look at the gas tax funds. So the gas tax funds, roughly $1,855,000. We're proposing to split the gas tax allocation between the two components of maintenance and projects. The maintenance component would represent roughly $1,540,000. And this would go towards pothole repair, striping, updating, and maintenance, street landscape maintenance, really any element within the road network system within the right-of-way. And Allison, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's currently 7 full-time employees in this position right now, 7.5.
We actually have 6 actual filled positions and 1 vacant.
Okay, 7. I was within the ballpark. And so these costs cover all the materials, labor, equipment, all the overhead to perform all the maintenance within the street network system. The remaining funds would be allocated towards the project component, so roughly $315,000. These are anticipated to go as federal match funds for our federal projects. Federal projects come with a stipulation that the cities have to have a match fund. Basically, you have to have some skin in the game in order to use those funds. Historically, the gas tax funds have served that purpose, and the local match have been applied out of gas tax funds.
So when you're allocated these gas tax funds, are they come with stipulations of how many, like you need to have those 4 pockets, or you can choose to have 2, or you can choose to have none? Like what are the?
Yeah, so there's 5 different sections of gas tax funds, and they all have their own unique what they can be used for and what they can't be used for. But for the most part, they can all be used for maintenance of roadway elements, and they can also be used for projects. There isn't a stipulation that you have to maintain or you have to do projects or you have to have any safety element within your category or your strategy. But based upon the amount of funding that's available, the different components that go into the road strategy, this is kind of how I've proposed breaking it up.
So if you had something that you couldn't get federal matching funds for, you could put it back into street maintenance or whatever, like you can manipulate those, or if you identify them, you have to spend it in that?
No, you don't have, no.
Okay.
So if you identify it there, I mean, it would be ideal to identify where those funds go for at the beginning of every year. But if something doesn't materialize, there isn't anything that says that we can't come back to the council and say, this didn't work out, how would we like to spend these funds? The road rehabilitation, let's dive into SB1 now. So SB1 is a fairly new funding source. The city of Turlock's estimated to receive $1,321,000 next fiscal year. This funding source is identified to have three different components. The safety component falls nicely into SB1 because SB1 was really passed on the premise of let's repair our road system, let's also make safety improvements to our road network. And so it really kind of fits nicely here. But all of these funds are, for the most part, pretty discretionary up to now. The gas tax and the SB1s are pretty discretionary on where we use them, what we use them for. So the maintenance portion of SB1 represents roughly $941,000. A majority of those costs are the costs that the city is going to incur from no longer receiving LTF funds. $350,000 roughly for traffic signal maintenance, traffic signs, parts and supplies for the different traffic signals, and also power costs for traffic signals and streetlights that are not in assessment districts. That's going to eat up a good chunk of those funds.
On that subject, have we properly assessed what potential cost savings there is in improving our lighting system and making them more energy efficient?
I know we've had some preliminary discussions on that, and I'm looking to Michael to help me out. This is a phone a friend cold call. Yeah, this was Michael. Have we had any? Have we realized any cost savings from TID when we switch over to LEDs versus the HPS?
So there is cost savings. It's about a 5 to 7 year payback return on investment by installing LED lights. The lights usually last 10 to 12 years. So it is cost beneficial. The problem we're having in some of these areas is we don't have the capital to invest in the lights. So what we're doing is lights go out, we replace them with an LED, but we haven't taken on a project. I think we have about 2,000 lights left to put energy efficient lighting in. So we haven't taken on that project because we need the capital up front to buy 2,000 lights and get them installed.
So if we have a budget for this, lighting is part of the budget for this, right? If we wanted to fix lighting, it would be addressed from this fund?
Yeah, lighting's an eligible cost.
Okay. So if we fully realized our cost savings potential with those 2,000 lights, overnight we just replace them with the most energy efficient system in place. At 7 years, we would realize the savings, and then those 3 years after that, we would be dipping into cost savings.
We'd be ahead. So we paid ourselves back after about 5 to 7 years, and
Yeah.
after 7 to 10, we're making profit, I guess you would say. So the lights are paid off, the savings we're realizing.
Could we reasonably identify what that cost savings would be in the 7 to 10 year range? With the data we have available.
I've had some cost analysis done by some energy conservation firms in the past. I can dig that up. It'll be a little bit out of date, but it should give us a good idea. I just don't have it with me.
Thank you, Michael. Stepping back into the maintenance component of SB1, so we talked about the traffic signal maintenance, we talked about the power costs for the traffic signals and the non-assessment district streetlights. The current budget also identifies additional additional, two full-time equivalent employees that's currently in the budget right now. And so we would be proposing to just keep the status quo with this budget right now. The SB1 funding strategy also, we talked a little bit about safety and what type of projects that those involve. Those involve, issues that arise that require a more fluid and dynamic approach to how those are dealt with. And also it identifies $280,000 towards projects. And the projects are identified at the tail end of this presentation as overall larger project strategy. So there's really two main strategies here. There's a larger maintenance strategy of how do we apply the limited funds that we have in the different components, but then also how do we select the projects from the amount of money that we know or we expect to have. And so that'll be rolled into that. The SB1 lists that are part of the actions tonight, the first SB1 list is for fiscal year 18-19. This identifies the costs for the shortfall in the LTF funding. These are necessary and they're required to be approved and submitted to the state on an annual basis. And the submittal deadline is May 1st. And so as you can see with this is a revised list for this current year. If council passes a list like we will talk about next year for 1920, there isn't anything that says that we can't come back and revisit that list. We've done this. This is the second time doing this now. So it really is more of a cleanup for this year.
So the list prior, can you go back to that one?
Yeah.
So none of these projects have been started, right?
Actually, the first two have been completed,
Okay.
but since they utilized funds of this current fiscal year, they have to be on the list. So the Christofferson median fencing, that was the fence that was installed in the median along Christofferson from Walnut, roughly the length of the junior high. That was completed, I want to say, August of last year. And then the slurry seals are throughout various portions of town. That was also completed around August or so.
It was much needed, by the way. I think
Yeah.
you've saved a lot of junior hires' lives. So.
Thank you. That's good to hear. That's, again, that completely aligns with the intent of SB1, making our roadway safer. So the SB1 list for 2019, it roughly mirrors the SB1 list that was previously approved for this year. It identifies projects, and namely matching funds for one large project or maybe two smaller ones. It's the Hawkeye Rehabilitation from roughly Olive all the way out to Daubenberger. And it's either done as a separate project or all as one larger project. Lander Avenue from roughly South Avenue to Glenwood. And so if...
Because you lost me. So Lander from
South or D Street,
D Street, okay.
all the way down to Glenwood.
I need
this si-
landmarks, like Chevron.
Yes, Chevron. This side, before you hit the freeway.
Before you hit the freeway.
Before
Got
you
it.
hit the freeway,
Okay.
yes. And then it also, since the strategy includes maintenance costs for road maintenance workers, hot mix asphalt, materials that those people would use, they're also identified on this list as well. And then we'll go into the federal funding component of the strategy. This is the most limited of all these different funds. The federal funds can only be used for arterials, collectors, and our only expressway, Christofferson. Historically, this is one of the few funding sources the city has received on a consistent basis, and that's why our strategy has primarily been to repair and maintain the arterials and collector streets. Local streets are not eligible for this sort of funding. So this is probably the most restrictive of the available funds.
So, Mr. Breen, didn't you just say Lander? Would that not be considered one of those three?
It is, yes. Yeah, these are not the only arterials and collectors, they're just examples of them. Except for Christofferson is the only expressway.
Where's Golden State Fall? I know half of it's us and half of it's county, right?
Mostly all of
Like by
Golden,
Taylor.
up until Taylor, it's all in the city limits.
Okay.
North of Taylor, it's in the county. South of Taylor, up to where the bridge starts, once you pass F Street, you're gonna go up and over the bridge, that's where the county limits start.
Oh, I'm thinking Keys. Sorry, I'm going the other way.
Okay, yeah, so
Sorry.
from Taylor, all the way
Taylor.
through town,
Yeah.
you go past F Street, before you go up over the overpass for the railroad tracks, that's where the city limits for Golden State ends.
But that would fall under a federal arterial?
It
No.
would fall in the arterial category, yes. So that is eligible for federal funding.
On expressway.
That's not an expressway, no, not based on the classification. So even though people drive 55 and they, get through town quickly, this is all based on the federal California road system map, which is an identification of road classification. Yes.
Does the classification of expressway do anything besides ensure that federal funding is available for it?
Well, it doesn't ensure that it's available for it, but it limits the federal funds to be used only for those classification of roads. It can limit the maintenance approach. If the Caltrans design standards are more stringent than the local standards, roads on the national highway system or that fall within this, these two arterial and collector classifications, we could have to apply those more stringent design standards. Whoops, sorry.
So we're going to have 1 minute, and then we're going to cut this out. This roads thing will go on. We'll open it to the public after we open our other meeting, so it's going to be a while before we get to a point.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
1 minute, Mr. Bray.
Okay, so lastly, we have Measure L, which is the half-cent sales tax measure that the voters passed in November of 2016. The current estimates are $3,200,000. This is the most easiest to use dollars on our project basis. They can be used on any classification, and they are up for the discretion of which roads the council wishes to use those on. And then I think that's probably
So
a good.
does Measure L money go through Stancog and then come to us?
Measure L money goes through the county and then it comes through us, or it goes through Stancog. There's reporting requirements that the city and all the cities report to Stancog. There's the oversight board that each jurisdiction has a member on. So there's a lot of Stancog involvement in it. But the city is in control of what roads we use those funds on.
Okay, Mr. Bray, I appreciate your time, but we're going to cut this out for a 5-minute break, so I need a motion to adjourn the special meeting. And a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then we will start our normal and get back to the other topics and then roads as well.